Our next speaker is Kim Ayres, who's the Planning Community Development Director for the City of Millville. Kim's been a professional planner who's worked with the city for 23 years in a number of different capacities, and she serves as the Planning and Community Development Director, overseeing planning projects and policy initiatives, including the state's first RAD, Revenue Allocation District. And it was designed for a neighborhood revitalization and Millville's arts district. And I think for most of us who've looked at these things, I think it's an example of how increment financing can work and benefit an entire community, and if it's done carefully and in a highly targeted way. And I'd like to welcome Kim Ayres to talk about that a bit. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. We try to tell ourselves when we're invited to talk about the RAD, it's not just because we're the only RAD and there's no other choice. The same way we try to tell ourselves they didn't eliminate RAD and create ERG because we were the only ones in the way we were doing it. So it's kind of an odd position to be in. But Millville decided to utilize the tool of the RAD when we were looking at doing some major redevelopment efforts throughout the city. And we happened to have a focus at that time that really we were doing a lot of neighborhood work. We've always done a lot of work focused on the neighborhoods. And so we were looking at ways we wanted to really concentrate our resources. Instead of being able to do a house at a time, you know, we wanted to start focusing on doing blocks at a time and really transforming our neighborhoods. So we were looking for any kind of tools that would really help us push that forward. And we happen to have economic development guy who really gets that. I mean, he really believes that that's every bit as important as attracting a new industry to town. So we had a good philosophical fit with it. And we had declared several areas in our community as redevelopment areas. And one in particular encompassed most of our downtown, our older core, and included those older neighborhoods as well. And that was an area of about 2,200 properties, over 800 acres. And it represented, though, just 17% of our property tax base. So we went through a process of the RAD as it was established at that time. And the main ideas or the main reasons that we were interested in the RAD was we had already begun this redevelopment focus. So we were looking to really attack the blight that we had, not just in our gray fields and our brown fields, but in our neighborhoods as well. So from the very beginning, we saw this as a tool to utilize new development to fund redevelopment. And that was attractive to us because we knew a lot of people in our community had asked us, why don't you just pass a bond? Why do we have to go through this RAD process? Well, the RAD represented kind of a compact with us and the neighborhood folks we were trying to help, that this was going to be a long-term effort. We designed the RAD to be 15 years, and we were making a long-term commitment that we were in this for the long haul. We weren't going to pass a bond and as soon as the money was done, be done and out of the project. We were making a statement to them and telling them this is a long-term project. We want to be in this until we can complete it. And with everything else you have in your community, all the pressing needs and pressing financial problems, the idea of floating a bond to do neighborhood redevelopment always kind of sunk down to the second layer. You know, it's either the fire truck or the trash truck or some pressing need comes. But when you're talking about a project like neighborhood redevelopment and financing that through a bond, you kind of get talked out of it along the way. So this we saw as really our opportunity to really commit long-term to neighborhood redevelopment in Millville. We also have an urban enterprise zone, and a question we got a lot was, why don't you just use UEZ funds? Well, this enabled us to preserve those UEZ dollars we had to put toward our industrial projects. So at the time, we were also creating a new industrial park at our airport. So we saw the ability then to have both this neighborhood redevelopment occur and simultaneously preserve our UEZ dollars to do industrial development closer to our airport. So that's kind of the background of where the idea of using the RAD in Millville came from. That idea also was a little bit difficult when it came to going through the process of being designated as a RAD, because being the first one, you always shoulder a little bit extra burden, a little bit extra problems going through the process. But the state wasn't really anticipating a RAD application coming back for that purpose. They had envisioned it as a more traditional project where the revenues would be used then for a new development project rather than for a neighborhood redevelopment project. So while it satisfied our needs very well, it did kind of create a few delays and a few bumps in the road as we went through the process, because it just wasn't what was expected for that first RAD to come through the state. But what we did was we had one lead project that we focused our RAD around. We call that our Phase 1 project. It was a large shopping center on 60 acres in the entrance to our town, right near routes 47 and 55. And we had a developer that was interested, that he was bringing with him some of the national chains. There are no such national chains in Millville at the time. We had very little commercial development, actually. To be honest with you, we had very little development. So we were starting to be discovered. There was some interest. But the problem with doing the shopping center was, while the stores like Target and Kohl's were interested, we couldn't quite get them to the finish line because we didn't have exact demographics that they like to see. We are a distressed community, a lot of lower income folks, and so we needed something to bring them to the finish line, because they had gotten through the regional level of approval, but at the national level there was some delay in really thinking this was a project to go through. So we provided $2.5 million to the shopping center, $1 million to Target, and then or $1.5 million to Target, and then $1 million to the shopping center developer to create the road system throughout the shopping center. The rest of the funding, we wanted to see that go to our neighborhoods. And the way we structured our RAD financially was, we determined that we were going to take 50% of the incremental financing, 50% of the new property tax, and we were going to use that to our RAD. We actually set up a separate RAD utility, and that money went directly to the RAD. And then we took 50% of it and we used that for general tax relief back to our general budget in the city. So we altered the plan a little bit that way as well, in that we didn't take 100% of the increment and put it to the redevelopment project. We set it up to be 50% and 50%, so there was still revenue coming into the city. We also had the pilots that were given to Target and the shopping center, and they came directly to the RAD. So those were our two sources of funding to create our RAD dollars, and we made it a 15-year project. We took the structure that we determined that over the course of that 15 years, we would receive $22 million in tax revenue from that shopping center. 11 million of that would go to the city under that 50-50 split. 11 million would go to the RAD. We determined that $11 million going to the RAD could support $8.3 million in debt financing. So we passed a bond for $8.3 million, and that's how we got the upfront money to do our neighborhood improvements. And in terms of the neighborhood, what we did was we were able to, our redevelopment area also represented an area where we had weed and seed federal dollars, where we had community development and home federal dollars, and several other targeted funding streams. We now concentrated our resources in this one area. And we've just finished year 3 of our project, and we've been able to substantially rehab 98 different homes in that target area. We have helped 65 investment properties, and they had to have a project in which it assisted the tenant as well as themselves. So we did things like energy efficiency, new windows, things like that. We've helped 24 first-time home buyers buy homes in that neighborhood. And our whole focus for this area has been to try and convert the rental and home ownership ratio around. Very high rental right now, very low home ownership. So a big focus of our effort has been to change that ratio. We also utilized some of the funding for code enforcement because we knew if we just built new places and made them shiny, that wouldn't solve all the problem either. So we have funded a targeted code enforcement effort, which has resulted in over 2,000 citations for code enforcement. We took a portion of the funding and assisted 2 nonprofit housing developers in the target area, so that 23 homes have been purchased and enabled them to then pursue funding, essentially choices funding through New Jersey HMFA to develop 23 affordable homes. We also took a small portion of it and compiled it with monies we received through the Neighborhood Stabilization Project. We've purchased a very dilapidated and blighted 101 unit apartment complex, relocated all of the tenants, and now have signed a development agreement for 36 new single-family home ownership units in a half-acre park. So those are some of the things that we've done. We tried to make it kind of an overall comprehensive effort, a real neighborhood transformation effort. It's been a little bit more difficult when the bottom dropped out in October of '08 because there's much less revenue coming in than we anticipated. So we've really tried to cut our overhead expenses a lot. But to date, we're very happy with those results.